Thank you so much for joining us. We are here with Veronica Carbajal. She will be addressing environmental justice in El Paso. We're so grateful that you're here. I know a lot of people are tuning in because they're excited to hear what you have to say. But on that note, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Veronica.
Thank you so much. I am a little bit worried about time. That's my only concern. It's really great to see so many familiar faces. And I'm going to be giving you a PowerPoint, so you're going to be looking at the screen a lot, so I'm sorry for that. But I do want to give a quick intro to who I am. As some of you know, I was born and raised in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. I am a fourth generation fronteriza, and you'll hear about my family in a little bit more. I am an environmentalist because of my grandparents. They taught me to love nature. I could only watch PBS, so I watched a lot of nature shows. I didn't know English, but nature needs no translation. And then they both passed away from cancer in their early 60s. And so for me, the environment has always been about chasing butterflies and hugging trees and being outside, but also loving people, and also realizing that when our planet is poisoned, our people are poisoned. And so when I decided I went to public school in El Paso, and when I went to I had a great high school counselor. Shout out to all the great teachers and high school counselors. She asked me what I wanted to study. And I said, I think environmental studies is something I'm interested in. So we looked at different programs. Brown University had one of the best in the country. I had a great recruiter. I managed to get in, and I did environmental studies my 4 years. Right away, I realized that EJ, environmental justice, was not incorporated into any of our classes. So I worked with our director of the department to do that. I did a thesis on Chicanas and environmental justice. And that really is the basis in some ways for what we're going to talk about today. So this is my thesis. It got our house flooded, so it's a little bit damaged, but it's really good. I still really am very proud of the work that I did. And it's so often we look at neighborhoods in our community. In El Paso, it could be pretty much everything south of the highway. And we think like, wow, there's a lot of stuff there that's not very attractive. And so I want us to start off just spending a couple of minutes, just kind of going into some reflection about how we define neighborhoods, okay? And so I'm gonna start sharing my screen now. I apologize again, it's gonna be mostly a PowerPoint, but it's gonna be interactive. And if you cannot see it, I think someone's gonna have to yell because I won't be able to see the chat. Okay, let's see. So when we think about good neighborhoods, what are they in El Paso, right? When you look up, what do you see? What does it sound like? Do you hear birds? Do you hear traffic? What does the air smell like? What are the homes built like? What are the schools like? Do you have parks, streets, curbs, street lights that you're proud of? What do the nearby businesses look like? What do they do? And when you walk out of the front door, whether it's from a house or a business, do you feel safe from crime, from traffic, from pollution, from heat? What businesses and utilities operate in good neighborhoods? Do you have coffee shops and restaurants? Do you have grocery stores and farmers markets? Or do you have gasoline stations? Do you have liquor stores and bars? Do you have power plants? Do you have landfills and recycling facilities? Do you have warehouses? And who lives in these good neighborhoods, right? Are they young? Are they older? Are they able-bodied or do they have disabilities? Are they Black, Indigenous, brown, yellow, white? Are they straight, gay, lesbian, transgendered? Are they new immigrants? Are they English speakers? Are they quote unquote educated? Are they rich, middle class, working poor, or on fixed income? Who are the people that make up good neighborhoods in El Paso? So how do we get good neighborhoods? By design, by exclusion, by investment, by zoning laws, and by organizing. So when we talk about environmental justice, we need to recognize the history of racism in our country. We had the Civil War that was over slavery, even though people still debate that. And it was from 1861 to 1865. And after that, we had legalized racism, legalized segregation, legalized disproportionate distribution of resources through Jim Crow laws. And those Jim Crow laws were in existence for 100 years. And then we had the civil rights movement, right? Because somehow some incredible people and their allies managed to pierce through all of these obstacles of Jim Crow and became leaders in their communities and became educated and became empowered with a love for their community. And so we have the civil rights movement primarily in the 1960s. And then in 1968, President L.B. Johnson, a Texan, really instituted a lot of laws that we're still fighting to defend today and that we're still fighting to give meaning to, but they all came from the 1960s. So when I talk about my thesis, I was looking at Austin, Texas. If you know Austin, you know that there's a highway that divides it. Before the highway, the railroad was used to segregate people. So in Austin, the city, like many cities in Texas, hired consultants that went to each of these cities and divided people and undesirable businesses by the railroad. So East Austin got the power plant, it got the landfill, it got toxic businesses, and all of the small businesses owned by Black and Mexican American Austinites were permitted only east of Austin. So all of the people and businesses that were undesirable were moved east of the railroad and then later east of the highway. What we have later on in the 1930s and 40s is redlining done by the federal government. It was a homeowners loan corporation that used data and evaluations organized by local real estate professionals, primarily white men, who assigned different grades to residential neighborhoods that reflected the mortgage security. So basically, for lenders, and I'm going to go to the maps now. For lenders, and I may have, so what we're going to look at right now is how they did this. When we're talking about mortgage lending, right, most people cannot pay cash for their home. So they, even back then, they needed loans. And so a mortgage lender wants to make sure that if they have to foreclose on your house because you don't make your payment because you passed away and no one's making payments, that when they foreclose, they're going to recover that loan amount. So if they let you borrow $100,000 and then you stop paying and they foreclose and your house is really only worth $80,000, then they're losing their investment. It's a high risk. And the fact is that redlining basically said, if you are a person of color, you depreciate the property. You bring down its value by being who you are. And so you're not a safe investment. And your property is not a safe investment. And your neighborhood is not a safe investment. So what they looked at in assigning these grades, they looked at, of course, things that we still look at now, right? In appreciating value, recent history of sales and rental values, the quality of the housing stock, but then also they looked at the racial and ethnic and class of residents in order to decide who could have access to this capital, who could have access to subsidies, right? In a country that prides itself so much on this picking yourself up by your bootstraps, the fact is that many people in this country, millions of them, had a heads up. They had a hand, they had loans to be able to create generational wealth. I'm going to show you this incredible project that was done. And before we go to that, I want you to keep this in mind, right? That we almost always think of El Paso as a majority minority community that was spared all of this. And the answer is you're wrong. El Paso was actually also impacted by Jim Crow. It was also impacted by these maps. So Richmond University and other universities have pulled up these historic maps that were used by the federal government and then local lenders to perpetuate Jim Crow and perpetuate segregation by not allowing certain people access to this capital. So this is El Paso. You see the colors, the legend tells you that the best are coded in green, the still desirable are in blue, yellow is definitely declining, and D is hazardous. If we zoom in, we can see these codings. This is a fantastic map, and I really encourage you all to look at it. D3, this is the Southern Pacific Railroad. If you're familiar with El Paso and downtown, we're looking at the Chamizal area, right? So we're looking at what you can think of as the exits primarily of Copia and Piedras, and then further down to Cotton. Cotton's really the exit you would take, and then you would make a left to circle back because there's no way to get through. So if we look at D3, you get a description, right? And it says, this large area is a concentration of Mexican peons, which constitute the largest class of Mexican laborers. All of the shacks therein are very poor, and there is positively no demand of any kind for property in this section. This area, as well as other Mexican sections, is avoided by mortgage lenders. D4. This small area is also a Negro concentration point. It is also occupied by Mexicans. There is little to distinguish adjoining D3 except the fact that Negroes have centered within. D3, D4, not desirable. We move up a little bit and we go to B4. No, let me see. I want to go to Manhattan Heights, which is, I think, B2. I might be wrong. But even if we look at, let me see, this is, I'm struggling a little bit to see the page. This is Government Hill. The way it's described is there is no racial undertones, there's nothing, right? So it's presumed, of course, the mainstream was white. This is Government Hill. It's a very good and highly desirable area from many standpoints. The area is occupied by business and professional people. Okay, so I do encourage you to spend some time looking at this map. They have other cities throughout the country that maybe you're familiar with that you might want to look at. The Chamizal neighborhood that we just talked about means a lot to me. My great-grandfather migrated here from Mexico in around 1915, 1917. My great-grandmother migrated because she was running from the revolution. My great-grandfather was running away from his family, and he was a farm worker. And someone who was a family member told him, I'm sorry to tell you this, but if you stay a farm worker, if you continue to work as a farm worker, you're gonna stay a farm worker. You have education. He came from a middle-class family in Mexico. And so the friend said, you should go apply at the railroad and they'll help you get your papers. And so he did, and he became a legal permanent resident, as did my great-grandmother, and their children were born in El Paso. This is my grandfather in the middle with his sister, and they lived at 216 Willow in the Chamizal neighborhood. It was an apartment. They lived in many apartments during the span of about 10 years. And if you go to the main library downtown, they have these incredible directories that identify people by name, profession, and address. And I have found my great-grandfather, and I can tell that they moved from one place to another. They are the people that were the undesirables. right? Their very presence brought down the value of the neighborhood because they were brown people. And I want that to sink in because we continue to see the vestiges of this now. This is where that particular residence used to exist. It's no longer there. It's mostly warehouses now. And if I can go back just for a second, the reason that I'm so incredibly passionate about home ownership, you know, I'm an attorney at Legal Aid. I do a lot of real estate cases, is because my family is a prime example of what home ownership can do. My great-grandfather decided that he wanted his children to have a house and a yard that they could inherit. He could not do that here, and I've explained why. So he moved his family to Mexico, to Juarez, and they bought a house. And then he bought vacant land that he gave to my grandfather, and my grandfather was able to build a house and raise 4 daughters. My grandmother did not work outside of the home. All of his girls had access to education. And my grandfather decided that he wanted to be a parking lot attendant and not an engineer, even though he had gone to college in Mexico, because he could make more money in the US as a valet parking attendant and use that in Mexico and have the kind of lifestyle that he had had growing up, a safe house and a space that he could then pass on to his children. Those 2 properties remain in my family, and they have been incredibly important in us being able to have access to not only money, but to choices and to freedom. And so that is why it is, for me, so incredibly important that we start thinking about how we're empowering these communities to really become ownership communities and not just rental communities. When I talk about affordable housing, that is really what I'm talking about, because I believe that's one of the best ways that we can break generational poverty and struggle. And so when we look at the Chamizal neighborhood, which I showed you was identified as a D3 and a D4 by the loan agency, what we see now is this, right? We see railroad is still there. We see warehousing of semis. We see junkyards in the middle of the city. I mean, this community is off of Cotton Exit, right? It is not out in the boonies. It is in the middle of the city, very close to downtown, very close to the medical center. And this is what we see today. This is from a playground at one of the housing authority complexes. And what you see here is the piles and piles and piles of recycling material at the W. Silver recycling plant. And recycling facilities are something that I looked at in my thesis, are a huge problem. They are not good neighbors. You have the traffic from the railroad lines, you have the semi-traffic, you have the fires that are occasionally there, you have vermin, you have pollution. It is incredibly difficult for a community to live next to a recycling facility, even though many of us feel fantastic when we recycle. This is the bus hub that was talked about a lot in the last few months, and it was part of a complaint that was made. EPISD decided that the best location for 120 buses was the Chamizal neighborhood, which has so many other issues, right? This bus hub replaced a green space. It replaced a historic baseball field with this. We'll talk about heat islands, but this is an issue, right? That we all know that concrete is much hotter than even dirt is. We know that it contributes to flooding problems. We have, you know, there is really no positive environmental impact from having more concrete, much less when it is for vehicles that release emissions. This is the Salazar apartment complex. It has, the housing authority has built new housing, but it has allowed almost 300 units to go vacant and to look like this for almost 4 years. But you also see this, right? You also see in the Chamizal people who are really struggling and working to live beautifully and to be able to raise their children in a way that is safe. But, you know, if we think about going back to what a good neighborhood is, imagine these children having to walk to Guillen Middle School, right, which is on the other side of Cotton, and having to navigate their way through semi-traffic, the railroad, and all of this pollution. So when we think about the Chamizal neighborhood, I think it's really important for us, again, to ground ourselves in specifics, because so many times we hear from our elected officials, El Paso doesn't have a race problem. When we had the horrific mass shooting, people kept saying racism came to El Paso, right? This wasn't born out of our community. But the fact is that we have institutionalized our racism here. And this, you know, people will point to the fact that we're 83% Hispanic, Latinx, Chicanos, whatever term you want to use. When we combine that with about 4 to 5% of people who are Black and or Asian American, we have about 89% people of color, right? Yet in certain communities that are really struggling with pollution and school closures and a lot of other injustice, the numbers jump. So it's almost 100% people of color. And that's across the board. If we talk about the refinery, if we talk about the power plants in Montana Vista, we talk about other power plants run by El Paso Electric, the number is almost 100% people of color. And then when we look at poverty levels, we look at numbers that are pretty stark. It's, you know, in the Chamizal, more than 50% of the community is living below the poverty level. They have a lot more English language learners than other EPISD schools. And parents and students have had to sue EPISD a number of times for discrimination. The Alvarado case from the 1970s desegregated the Chamizal schools as well as others, and kids had to be bussed out because there was a recognition that the school district was not providing anything to the level that it was providing to white students in El Paso. And then most recently, my colleagues at Legal Aid brought this lawsuit with the incredible group Familias Unidas. And this deals with the school closure of Bell Elementary and Burleson, and kids being pushed into Douglas. So the playground picture that I showed you is actually right next to Douglas Elementary. So Douglas is right next to all of these environmental issues, and yet the school district preferred that location to Bell, which has less environmental attacks, as well as Burleson, and moving the kids to Zavala Elementary. And if you ever want to Google Zavala or drive by it, it is right in the middle of the International Bridge crossings. So how do we get good neighborhoods? We get good neighborhoods, I believe, by investing in them, right? By facilitating home ownership, by keeping schools open and improving them, by prioritizing community amenities and services, by supporting small businesses owned by neighborhood residents, and by undoing the heat island effect by planting trees and increasing green spaces and increasing green infrastructure. So the heat island effect, as you all know, is basically recognizing that we have micro ecosystems. And every time that we create impermeable surfaces, right, we replace soil and green space for concrete, we are creating hotter and hotter environments for those communities. Keep in mind that many people in these communities don't have refrigerated air, and they can't afford high electric bills. And they almost, they have certainly a higher rate of being uninsured and underinsured. And so heat, we know, can cause a lot of health problems. Not being able to pay your utility bills can be lethal. if you have insulin that has to be refrigerated, if you have an oxygen tank, or if you have a predisposition that is impacted by overheating in your own home. So this is really, really crucial that we have to address the fact that we need to undo the heat island effect in communities like the Chamizal. And then of course, enforcing our environmental regulations, which are not great, especially in the state of Texas, but they are there and they should be enforced and they should be improved. We get good neighborhoods by excluding things, right? And I'm not saying people, I'm saying that there has to be a concerted effort to recognize that there are things that are not good neighbors and that we should not ask certain communities to bear those burdens. So that's recycling facilities, traffic, power plants, water treatment plants, junkyards, and even homeless shelters. We get good neighborhoods, I believe, by not asking certain people to carry the burden of our consumption, our pollution, our economic development, and our inability to provide permanent housing for people who are homeless. And I want to go back to that for a second. When we talk about people who are homeless, we all understand, I hope, that there are layers and layers and layers of issues that need to be addressed, often on a case-by-case basis, and I've seen that with my own clients. People who are chronically homeless tend to have a lot of things that need urgent help. Mental health care, health care for other physical disabilities, as well as money management, drug addiction assistance, emotional support. There's so many things that need to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. But when we have these emergency shelters, which are very important and are very needed, you're going to find them in communities like the Chamizal. And that's a community that's already dealing with a lot of different issues. You're gonna find them in communities like Valverde, Washington, and Delta, which are right by the University Medical Center, also south of the highway. So they're east of the International Bridge of the Americas. And that community, for a year, has gone without its community centers, as did most of our communities, but their community centers were replaced by the emergency shelter for homeless people because of social distancing requirements. And they saw a lot of different issues in their community, including vagrancy, including damage to properties, et cetera. And again, they were like, well, why do we have to, we understand there's a need, but why are we the ones having to carry the burden for the entire city, right? When we had the cooling centers for our older people, that community was not able to use those cooling centers because their cooling center was housing homeless people. And so we need to start thinking about these communities in a more holistic way and to start really addressing problems at the root so that there is no added burden to anyone and we have permanent solutions to these problems. We also get good neighborhoods by zoning rules that prioritize people. The city of El Paso has a zoning review board, but what we're seeing to this day is that more and more properties south of I-10 are being rezoned to commercial and non-residential uses. So I'm gonna show you, it's really easy to find the zoning map in El Paso. You can just Google City of El Paso zoning, and you'll see a zoning map link. And then I'm gonna show you my neighborhood. And I'm gonna pop in, so you're gonna see the color, you're able to see a legend. You click on legend. I'm gonna unclick this so you can see. You click on legend and you can scroll down and see the different zoning categories. There's also an appendix where you can look to see how that category is defined. Let me go back to my neighborhood. The colors are not fantastic. It's a little bit hard to distinguish based on the colors, but the letters that you want to look for, I think, if you're looking for a neighborhood, are A, which is apartments, and R, which is residential, okay? So this is Memorial Park. You have lots and lots of residential zoning, okay? Then we're going to look at the Chamizal. And what you see, and we just talked about, this is, down here is, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, but by Cesar Chavez, the border highway, that's Bowie High School, that's the, now it's the bus hub for EPISD. This is right here in the middle, you're gonna see the Salazar apartment complex, and you start to see different colors, right? It's not all residential, it's not all apartments. What you are seeing is a lot of M, and the M is light manufacturing. That is why you have recycling facilities. That's why you have the vehicle repair shops. That's why you have the cardboard recycling, the railroad, all of the semi-warehousing, the junkyards. That is why you have all of that. C is commercial. Commercial isn't always innocuous, right? Commercial also means traffic. It also means warehousing. It also means pollution. And so this is if we were to layer, right, the maps that I showed you before that segregated our communities and that impeded people from having access to home mortgages, and we look at this, this is now the highway. It used to be that the railroad was the only divider, but now we have this, right? We still have so much work to do when it comes to undoing the damage. And I really don't see a lot of movement in that direction from our local leadership or even our state and federal leadership in this regard. So if you want to, this is a really great map. You can always go to these maps and look at your own neighborhood to see, you just drop in your address and you can see how it is zoned, and you can look at the city's agenda every 2 weeks to see what kinds of zoning changes they're making. Okay, so one of the other things that I believe that we need to do is that in order to get good neighborhoods, we need to start calling out racism by our elected officials. This, so you might recall, was a Glass-Steagall study that was done as part of the 2006 downtown plan and approved by our city council, many of whom are progressive and are still active in local politics. And this was at a time when the city really started to focus on, you know, improving downtown and making it the center of all things. And this Glass-Steagall study basically said, where is El Paso now and where should El Paso be? So to the left, you have this image of this elderly man, looks a lot like my other great-grandfather. He is identified as an old cowboy, male, 50 to 60 years old. He's gritty, he's dirty, he's lazy, he speaks Spanish, and he's uneducated. That is the old El Paso that this study said we should run away from. The new El Paso actually had, we were not making this up, like this was actually a study that we paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for. The new El Paso is male and female. It's 30 to 40 years old, educated, entrepreneurial, bilingual, has, I guess, family, and enjoys entertainment. And so you might say, well, you know, Veronica, this is, okay, so it was a bad study. People should have apologized. They didn't apologize. So what? Well, the so what is that we see this today, right? When we talk about Duranguito and the sports arena, and the fact that this woman who stands here, Antonia Morales, Toñita Morales, has been fighting to clean up her neighborhood for 40 years, and then is told that she's now in the way of progress, and she has to move. And her neighbors are scared because they aren't homeowners. They're tenants, just like she is. They're renters, just like she is. So the city hires someone to convince them and convince them and convince them to move out, and gives them money. And all of them but Doñita left, and her neighbor who's a homeowner, Romelia Mendoza. These two women are the only ones left. When we look back at this, I need someone to tell me that this is not exactly what we're doing to our people right now. That we're not in fact getting rid of people who are older, who are Mexican, Mexican American, Hispanic, who are Spanish speakers only. Tell me that we're not doing this right now, that we're not actually implementing this racist policy that is really the new Jim Crow. When we think about gentrification, whether it's a private market or public projects, we are pushing out people who have always been deemed undesirable by the powers that be. So how do we get good neighborhoods? I think lastly, I want to talk about the really great work that's being done by women in the Chamizal. And there's this quote that I actually had in my thesis that says, the strength of a revolution can be judged by the role of women in it. And it's by Elizabeth Martinez in 500 Years of Chicano History and Photographs. It's a beautiful book, lots and lots of photographs. La Mujer Obrera came about after NAFTA. As many of you might know, El Paso had a lot of garment factories. My mom was a garment worker for a period of time, and NAFTA displaced those jobs and moved them to Mexico. And so La Mujer Obrera organized the women who were displaced by this, and Carmen Rodriguez, who's an amazing attorney and one of my mentors, and Jerry Wesevich, also a mentor at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, took on this battle with La Mujer Obrera to fight for retraining programs for women who were displaced. And La Mujer Obrera just has become this incredible force in our community for creating jobs and creating a different vision of economic development. I invite you to go to their website. They do a ton of organizing. They have Café Mayapan, which is delicious. They have the trading company that helps people in Mexico sell their products here. They have an incredible award-winning daycare center, Rayito del Sol. They have organizing with Familias Unidas. They have been fighting so many things, and they're incredibly amazing. And if you can volunteer for them, I suggest that you do. If you can donate your time, if you can donate your voice, they need you. And also the things that I recommended, honestly, are things that I would need to run by them, right? To see what is it that they want? What vision do they have for their community? Because the experts are the ones who live the consequences of everyone else's decisions. And then they have they're cultural warriors, so they have a lot of incredible shows. Before the pandemic, they were always hosting these things that were filled with so much heart and passion. And then they have Tierra es Vida, which is a garden that helps kids and teenagers and adults reconnect with the earth and become more sustainable. So I hope that this has been helpful and eye-opening. If you are hungry for more, and I hope that you are, because I just covered very briefly my own perspective on what I've seen in this community and what I think is lacking. Familias Unidas del Chamizal, like I said, is an incredible organization. Paso del Sur has done a lot of good work in Segundo Barrio and Duranguito. We have local scholars, Miguel Juarez, Yolanda Leiva, both PhDs, incredible Chicano, a Chicano and a Chicana who are just lovely people and have done a lot of really good historical research. Angelina Martinez, a PhD candidate. Dr. Leiva and Ms. Martinez are actually contributing to a lawsuit right now that Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid filed on behalf of Familias Unidas regarding the school closures. The Green Hope Project has a class that Darlene Aguirre and I did on environmental justice, and it covers 3 different communities in El Paso, and it's actually a class that you can use a curriculum that you can use in your classroom. And then TexasHousers.org is a premier organization. It's been around for about 30 so years. They actually map out things for different cases. And so their maps showing discrimination have been used to sue the housing authorities. They've been used to sue FEMA, all kinds of things that are just evidence of disparate treatment and discrimination. So I hope this was enjoyable to you, and thank you, Judy. But I really appreciate. Oh, thank you. You can see that in the chat. There's a lot of happening in the chat, and Candy is always so on top of everything. I'm so in awe of you. I want to give a huge thank you to Green Hope Project for allowing me this opportunity, but also for balancing these things out, right? You have always committed yourselves to being outdoors and celebrating nature, cleaning it up, and educating people about the consequences of our consumption and our inability to handle our trash. And then also now environmental justice and racism. And so I think that El Paso is, we keep saying it's at a renaissance, right? When it comes to so many things that we're doing in the community. And I think this is one of them. And when I see people like Hilda Villegas and Semeli de Aslan in Familias Unidas, they're incredible. They just carry so much wealth and power. And I hope that more and more of our community members across our huge city are able to recognize that. So thank you, everyone. I think we have a little bit of time for some questions, and I'd love to hear feedback or concerns or things. Even if you don't agree, we can talk about that too.
So we did have a question earlier. If you were going to share the slides with everyone or no, the presentation?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And how can they access that?
I think, I'm not sure, Kenny, maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, so guys, I have your registration information for this event, so we'll just take those emails. If your email was incorrect or whatever, be sure to get a hold of me to make sure I send you the right one. And we can just do a follow-up thank you for joining the session. Here's the presentation. Okay.
Yes, and I think the only concern I would have is that a lot of what I did was looking at particular websites.
Okay.
And so that might be a little bit different. I'll have to change it a little bit to incorporate that.
Sure. Yeah, and we can figure it out. And then a couple comments, you should run for public office again. This was very good and informative, passionate, well presented. Gracias, Veronica, for this super important and educational information. When was the Glass Beach study?
2006. I think it was 2006, 2008, maybe.
Okay. And Melissa asked, Veronica, how does the Newman 6 project tie to the environmental justice? Will it affect a specific demographic of people in El Paso, environmental racism?
Yes. Yes. If you do a Google map of all of the power plants in our community, as well as a sewage treatment plant, for instance, you're going to find the demographics around them to be very similar to the Tamizal, right? So that's going to continue to be an issue. Keep in mind that Newman 6 is not a new power plant. There's already an existing power plant. So they're extending that power plant in a community that is low income and primarily Hispanic by this new addition. And it borders Chaparral, New Mexico, which is also a community that struggles significantly. And so definitely it's, you're not gonna find this in the country club. You know, you're not gonna find this in the Upper Valley. Like it's that, I think most of us recognize that. What I hope comes out of this is that we become more observant of our environment. So often we're just driving by, we're not on the bus, we're not interacting with other people, and we drive by the refinery and don't think about the fact that people live right next to it. And the presentation that we did for teachers as part of the CESI program, Tony Dueñez did incredible drone footage that I think I had never seen that perspective of these different polluters. You just get to see these fence line communities. They're right next to the pollution, and we seem to be okay with it.
So Robbie says, I learned so much. Thank you. Michelle says, clearly there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think one area is challenging the dominant narratives the city puts out related our history, culture, and even things like sustainability. How can we as community members counter this?
Voting is one way. Another way is, if you can, watch the city council meetings, join in as public comment if you can. I know sometimes we're working, so it's hard for us to do that, but you have the right to ask your city representative, your county commissioner, your state delegate to meet with you and to talk about these things. It's also not an individual affair anymore. There are so many different organizations that are doing this kind of work. There's Sunrise El Paso, there's Eco El Paso, Green Hope Project. Look at all of the presenters in just this summit. And we have now a community of people who really are becoming a force. Think about Lost Dog. How many people rallied around saving Lost Dog and putting it on the ballot and then voted to preserve that space, right? So there is that energy and that love of nature in this community, and we just need to spread it out into addressing these urban issues as well.
And, you know, FYI, just a plug for another workshop that's going on tomorrow with Franklin Mountain Wilderness Coalition. Speaking of saving land, Kastner Range, guys, sign up for this workshop tomorrow. You know, I mean, sign up for several of them. We have even more today, but that workshop will be in person. So we will be outside Trans Mountain, by the mountain. What better way to spend your weekend? So please, and I know Judy's put some stuff in the chat about, please sign that petition. So, you know, the way we help is not being complacent. I know, we, like you said, we do get busy, but it takes like 10 seconds to do the signature that Judy's putting in the chat right now. That's how you can help preserve this land. And so Cito says, what is the action being considered next week?
Regarding Lost Dog, because someone said, Judy, if you would.
Yeah, it's easier just to tell you rather than type it. I'm sorry. There's the conservation easement that is being proposed will have the first reading. So that conservation conveyance is the only way to permanently protect the land. They're finally getting around to it after we voted protect that land how long ago. It'll be both Lost Dog and the Knapp land that's in Northeast. So it's the first reading, then the final vote on the completion of the conservation easement will be in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to recognize Judy Ackerman, who is, oh my gosh, phenomenal. I don't know how you do all the things that you do, Judy. You're amazing. But she is a lover and protector of nature, and I'm just always in awe of you and so many other people that are doing really great work. I did a presentation for some high schoolers a couple of weeks ago, and one of them asked me, he had actually seen our educational curriculum, and he said, you know, should we be working in these green spaces like Rio Bosque and the Keystone? Shouldn't we be working in the Chamizal? And I said, both. You can do both, because we need those spaces. The kids of the Chamizal need to be able to go to those spaces as well, because we all know that nature is how many of us continue to do this very hard work. It's where we renew, it's where we refresh and we start over. And so everyone needs to be working on those spaces as well. I don't see these two movements as being oppositional. They have to be intersectional. For all of us, you know, dealing with our polluted neighborhoods is as important as dealing with our open spaces, and we have to just do both. How is the Medical Center of the Americas affecting the Chamizal neighborhoods? I think right now it's hard to see that, Vero. Thank you for that. But we do see a huge impact in the neighborhoods that are very close to it. So when we look at Valverde, Washington, and Delta neighborhoods, Of course, they're losing, they have lost land, not by eminent domain, it's been negotiation so far, but you always think that, right? If you look at any kind of health center in Houston, in Arizona, they tend to, in San Antonio, they tend to consume a lot of land around them. So that is an issue, and one that I'm paying very close attention to.
So, Vero, if anybody would like to get a hold of you, if they have more questions or they want to bring some concerns to you, how would they do that?
Probably social media is the best way to get a hold of me. Vero for El Paso or Veronica Carbajal. I can put my personal email in the chat. I'm not here as an attorney for legal aid, but I'd love to hear from people, and really for our younger attendees, we love you and appreciate you, and also can you please step up and keep doing the great things that you're doing, because we need to continue to have this conversation decades from now, right? Just to look back and say, like, we actually made some improvements and changed the way that we prioritize things.
And for those of you that are listening later, you're not live, her email address is verocarbajal815@gmail.com. And we do have a comment in the chat, says the Chamazal used to look like the Rio Bosque before settlement, and until relatively recently was agricultural valley. No reason not to be green there as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's some really great studies being done, and I think UTEP and community college, if they're not being done there, they should be done there, where we look at canopy, right? Green canopy, what parts of the city are greener than others. I can tell you my neighborhood, which we looked at earlier in the zoning map, has a lot of trees, a lot more trees than the Chamizal does. And that impacts everything. So I know we're at time.
I did put the CESI link in the chat, Vero, and so just to give them a recap of what they would be watching.
Yes, so during so CESI is the class is designed for high school students, and we basically walk through the concept of environmental justice, and then we talk about 3 different communities. We talk about the Chamizal, and we interviewed Hilda and Semeli, and Montana Vista, which has a power plant that I was involved with a few years ago, Far East El Paso, and then we talk about the refinery. And so it's really about breaking down these concepts. It's very engaging and interactive for students, and we have received really good feedback from teachers, because we wanted to keep it local, right? We always want people to start local, and then, act local, think global.
So, man, you had the presentation right on point. I think we're at the mark. Unless anybody else has any more questions, you can throw them in the chat or unmute. Just reminder, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to www.greenhillproject.org and sign up for our newsletter, because we'll remind you about more events like this. And Vero's given you all her information to contact her. And this will be the recording. If you came in late and you missed stuff and you're upset about it, don't worry, it's okay. We're going to put the recording on YouTube, and we will also put that out through our newsletter, and we'll put it on our website. So stay tuned for that. But thank you so much, Vero, for coming. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you, Candy. I just want to clone you.
No, oh my God. I think the same of you. I'm like, when does she sleep? Oh my gosh. Yeah, but thank you guys. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and enjoy your weekend. Please go to our other workshops. There's plenty more. Go to the website, sign up.